In the village of Ikuano, nestled beside the banks of a winding river, lived a young girl named Urema. Her heart was full of hope, but her eyes, once bright with the promise of life, were now empty and clouded. Urema was blind, a condition that had overtaken her when she was very young, not from birth, but as a result of a terrible illness. The sickness had stolen her sight and left her world in darkness. Yet, even in the absence of light, Urema shone with an inner strength that refused to diminish. Urema had always been loved by the villagers. Her kindness and resilience had earned her admiration, especially because, despite her blindness, she faced the world with a courage that few could match. The village elders would often speak of her as a symbol of hope, the girl who never gave up, no matter how difficult her life became. She would walk through the village with her cane, feeling her way through the familiar sounds and textures, moving with the certainty of someone who knew the rhythm of the earth beneath her feet. However, Urema's family life was far from the admiration she received from the community. Her mother, cold and indifferent, always favored her older sister, Nina, whose beauty and charm made her the apple of their mother's eye. Nina was the one who was praised and pampered, while Urema's needs were constantly overlooked. Urema's blindness only deepened the gap between them, and their mother's affection for Nina grew stronger with every passing day. While Nina basked in the attention, Urema quietly suffered, watching her sister's beauty bloom, while she herself remained in the shadows. Their father had passed away when Urema was just a small child, and with his death, Urema had lost her only protector. The only person who cared for her, who truly understood her pain and struggles, was her grandmother, Nene. Nene had always been by Urema's side, singing to her, telling her stories of bravery and perseverance. Nene's voice was a balm for Urema's heart, soothing her in the moments of loneliness and doubt. Urema had found comfort in her grandmother's words and songs, always holding on to the belief that her life, despite the hardships, would one day change for the better. But when Nene passed away, everything in Urema's world seemed to fall apart. Her grandmother had been her last source of comfort and love, and now, she was gone. Urema's heart was shattered, and for the first time, she felt completely alone. She could no longer hear Nene's voice calling her name, could no longer feel the warmth of her embrace. It was as if the very light in her life had been extinguished, leaving her in a deep, unyielding darkness. Without Nene, Urema felt even more isolated from her family. Her mother's neglect became more apparent, and Nina's jealousy simmered just below the surface. Nina, who had always been the object of their mother's affection, began to resent Urema more and more. She could not bear to see her sister praised for the very qualities that she felt she lacked: Urema's inner strength, her kindness, and the love she received from the villagers. Nina's jealousy grew like a dark cloud, clouding her judgment and poisoning her heart. One day, as Urema sat by the village well, feeling the cool breeze on her face, she overheard a conversation that would change her life forever. Two women were talking about a powerful healer, a woman from a distant village who was said to possess the ability to cure any ailment. They spoke in hushed tones about how this healer had restored sight to a blind man and had cured illnesses that no other doctor could. Urema's heart raced. Could this healer help her? Could she regain her sight? Her mind buzzed with excitement, and for the first time in years, Urema felt a flicker of hope. She had always believed that one day, somehow, her life would change for the better. Perhaps this healer was the key to unlocking the future she had always dreamed of. But there was one problem: Urema had no money, no way to afford the journey to see the healer. Her mother would never give her the money, and Nina would likely mock her for even considering such a thing. But Urema was determined. She knew that her only chance at seeing the world again, at truly living, was to find a way to make it happen. So, she began saving whatever she could: small coins from tasks around the village, gifts from kind neighbors who felt pity for her. Each day, Urema would put aside a little more, carefully storing the coins in a small pouch she hid under her mat. She couldn't let Nina see her savings, for fear that her sister might take it as she had done before. But Nina, ever jealous and suspicious, noticed Urema's growing happiness. She watched her sister with narrowed eyes, wondering what Urema could possibly be so happy about. One evening, when Urema was out gathering firewood, Nina snooped through her sister's belongings and found the small pouch of savings hidden under the mat. Her eyes gleamed with greed. She counted the coins, her fingers trembling with anticipation. What could Urema possibly need money for? Nina thought. She couldn't even see what she would buy. Driven by her jealousy and malice, Nina decided to take the money for herself. She used it to buy herself new clothes, basking in the attention she received from the villagers for her beauty. When Urema discovered her savings were gone, her heart sank. She felt a deep sorrow that her own sister could betray her in such a way. But instead of anger, Urema chose to sing, just as her grandmother had taught her. She sang the song of resilience, the song that had once brought her comfort. And though the pain in her heart was deep, Urema did not allow it to consume her. She chose to forgive Nina, for she understood that bitterness and hatred would only weigh her down. Urema resumed saving, this time with even greater determination. She refused to let her sister's cruelty stop her from achieving her dream. And after weeks of hard work and careful saving, she finally had enough money to make the journey to the healer's village. Urema set out for the neighboring village the very next morning. The journey was long, and the path was rugged, but her determination pushed her forward. She walked with her cane in front of her, tapping the earth, testing each step as she made her way through the dense forest and over rolling hills. The sun beat down on her, but she hardly noticed. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of the healer. What if she could truly regain her sight? What if her life could change forever? Each night, she found a place to rest along the path, usually under a tree, her body aching from the long days of travel. But sleep rarely came easily. She would lie awake, thinking of the village she left behind, the people who had once whispered behind her back, the family who had treated her as though she were invisible. Despite everything, a part of Urema still longed for their acceptance, their love. But she knew she could not wait for them. She had to take her fate into her own hands. On the fourth day of her journey, after passing through a thick forest, Urema stumbled upon a small village at the foot of a mountain. The village was quiet, the air thick with the scent of herbs and plants, and she could hear the distant clinking of metal as the blacksmith worked. She knew this was the village where the healer lived, and a new wave of excitement rushed through her. Her heart beat faster, and her palms felt clammy with anticipation. A kind woman, noticing Urema's arrival, approached her with a warm smile. "You've come to see Nwaboueze, haven't you?" she asked, her voice gentle but knowing. Urema nodded, grateful for the woman's understanding. She explained her condition, her years of blindness, and the hope she carried in her heart. The woman took her hand and led her to Nwaboueze's home, a small cottage at the edge of the village. The healer's house smelled of sage and sweet incense, and the air inside felt alive with the energy of plants and remedies. Nwaboueze, a woman with a calm presence, was seated at a wooden table, grinding herbs in a mortar. She looked up when Urema entered, her sharp eyes taking in the young woman before her. "You are Urema," Nwaboueze said, her voice smooth as honey. "I have heard of you, your story travels far." Urema, taken aback, felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "You have?" Nwaboueze nodded, setting the mortar aside. "Yes. The villagers speak of your strength. They speak of the way you carry yourself despite the darkness that surrounds you. You are known for your kindness and your resilience." Urema felt her heart swell with pride. For the first time in years, she was not seen as a burden, not just the blind girl who struggled to survive, but as someone who mattered. Nwaboueze gestured for Urema to sit, and she began to prepare a remedy that would help restore her sight. She carefully mixed different herbs, their scents filling the air, and offered them to Urema in a small cup. "Drink this," Nwaboueze instructed. "It will not cure you in a single day, but it will set you on the path to healing. Your eyes have suffered much, but the power of these herbs can slowly bring light back into them." Urema took the cup, its contents warm and bitter on her tongue. She swallowed and closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the warmth to settle inside her. She felt a glimmer of hope stir within her, a feeling that perhaps this was the beginning of the change she had longed for. Nwaboueze smiled gently. "You have suffered much in your life, Urema. But the journey you are about to embark on is not just one of physical healing. It is a journey of the heart. To regain your sight, you must also learn to see with more than just your eyes. You must see with your heart." Urema felt a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in a long while, She felt as though she was exactly where she was meant to be. Nwabue's words resonated deeply within her, and as she sat in the healer's home, surrounded by herbs and the quiet hum of nature, she realized that her journey was far more than a quest for sight. It was a quest for self-discovery, for inner strength, and for forgiveness. Over the following weeks, Urema stayed with Nwabues, learning the ways of healing, living each day with a sense of purpose. The healer taught her about the herbs that could cure various ailments, the plants that held the power to soothe pain, and the ancient rituals that connected one to the earth's healing energy. Slowly, Urema's sight began to improve. At first, it was faint. Shadows began to blur into shapes, and light filtered through the darkness. But with every passing day, her vision became clearer, and so did her understanding of herself. She no longer felt like the blind girl from Ikuano, the one who had been abandoned and ignored. She was no longer defined by the physical blindness that had once confined her. Her sight, though still not perfect, began to reflect the clarity of her heart. As her vision improved, so did her sense of self-worth. She had learned to heal, to care for others, and in doing so, she had found the strength to heal herself. One day, as Urema was practicing her healing techniques on an injured bird, she felt a familiar tug at her heart. It was the pull of her past, the village of Ikuano, and the family she had left behind. It had been many months since she had left, and though she had found new strength, a part of her still longed for the closure she had never received. But Urema knew she had to go back. She had to face the people who had once scorned her, and most of all, she had to confront Nina. It was time to return to the village, not as the blind girl who had been abandoned, but as the woman who had healed and transformed. Urema understood now that true healing was not just about recovering from illness, it was about forgiveness, reconciliation, and the strength to move forward. After months of training with Nwabues, Urema felt the weight of the past pulling her back to Ikuano. She had transformed, not only physically but emotionally. Her sight had returned, though still somewhat faint, and her heart was filled with the understanding that true healing began within. But the past, especially her strained relationship with her sister Nina, could not be left behind. Urema knew that if she was to move forward, she had to face the people who had once hurt her, including the sister who had poisoned her. One bright morning, as she prepared to leave Nwabue's village, the healer gave her a final piece of advice. Remember, Urema, healing is not just about curing the body, it's about mending the soul. You must let go of the weight in your heart before you can truly be free. With Nwabue's words in her mind, Urema set out for Ikuano, the village she had once called home. The journey was not as long this time, and as she approached the village, she could already hear the familiar sounds of life, children playing, elders talking, the rustling of trees in the breeze. Yet, she knew the landscape of her heart had changed forever. As she entered the village, memories of the pain and neglect she had suffered flooded her mind. She could still hear the cruel words of her mother and the mocking laughter of Nina. But she also remembered the kindness of the villagers who had once shown her compassion. They, too, had witnessed her growth and the strength she had cultivated. It wasn't long before word spread that Urema had returned. People from the village, curious and eager to see her, gathered in small groups to watch as she made her way to her old home. Her mother, who had once ignored her, was now bedridden, gravely ill. She had heard of her daughter's return but could barely muster the strength to greet her. But it was Nina's sudden and unexpected illness that caused the most stir. Nina, once radiant and full of life, had fallen ill with a mysterious sickness that no one in the village could identify. The illness consumed her quickly, draining her of strength and leaving her pale and weak. It was then that Urema learned of her sister's condition. Nina, the same sister who had poisoned her in the past, was now fighting for her life, and the village was desperate. No healer had been able to help her. The once beautiful girl, who had tormented Urema for so long, was now vulnerable, and the villagers, who had once overlooked Urema's worth, turned to her. In the midst of her sorrow and hesitation, Urema felt something stir within her. She had the power to heal now, to help those who were in need. She had been taught well by Nwabues, and now it was her turn to put that knowledge to use. Urema entered her mother's hut, where Nina lay on a mat, her body trembling with fever. Her face was pale, her skin slick with sweat. Urema stood over her sister for a long moment, taking in the sight of the woman who had once made her life so miserable. The old bitterness rose within her, threatening to cloud her judgment. But Urema quickly pushed it aside. She had learned the power of forgiveness, and now was the time to put it into practice. Without a word, she knelt beside Nina, who could barely open her eyes. Her sister's gaze flickered weakly as she noticed Urema's presence, and she struggled to speak. I'm sorry," Nina whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible. "Please, forgive me." Urema placed a hand gently on Nina's forehead. The anger that had once consumed her was now replaced with a deep sadness, for she realized how much her sister had suffered, even if it was in a way she never expected. Nina's pride, jealousy, and insecurity had poisoned their relationship for so long, but now, Urema could see the vulnerability behind it all. Her sister, who had caused so much pain, was now begging for forgiveness. Urema looked at her mother, who lay quietly in the corner of the hut, watching with wide eyes. The years of neglect, the coldness, and the favoritism had hurt Urema deeply, but in this moment, all she could think of was the healing that needed to take place. "I forgive you, Nina," Urema said softly, her voice steady. "And I will help you." She stood up, preparing a mixture of herbs from her pouch, her grandmother's teachings and Nwabue's wisdom flowing through her. She crushed the leaves carefully, boiling them in water to create a powerful remedy. The bitter scent filled the room, and Urema carefully applied the treatment to her sister's body, using all the knowledge she had gained during her time with Nwabues. 4 days, Urema worked tirelessly to nurse Nina back to health. The villagers were amazed at her skills, and they watched with quiet respect as Urema took charge of the healing process. She treated Nina with the utmost care, focusing not only on the physical illness but also on the emotional healing that would take place between them. Slowly, Nina's fever began to subside, her strength returning, and her color slowly came back to her cheeks. One evening, as Nina sat up in bed, feeling stronger than she had in days, she looked at Urema with gratitude and sorrow in her eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Nina said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I poisoned you. I made your life miserable. I was consumed by jealousy." Urema smiled gently, her eyes filled with compassion. "You didn't know how to cope with your own pain, Nina. We all have our flaws. But we can change. We can grow." Nina reached out, her hand trembling as she touched Urema's. "I want to be different. I want to be the sister you always deserved." Urema's heart swelled with emotion. "It's never too late to change," she whispered. "Forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, and through it, we heal." From that moment on, their relationship began to mend. Nina worked alongside Urema, helping her with the village's healing needs. Though the scars of the past were not erased, they slowly began to heal, just as their bodies and spirits did. Urema's journey had come full circle. She had regained her sight, not only of the physical world around her but also of the deeper truths within her. Her heart was now free, and with it, she had the power to heal not just her sister, but herself. And in doing so, she had shown the villagers the true power of forgiveness, how it could transform lives and mend even the deepest of wounds. Thanks so much for watching. I would like to read your lessons learned from this story in the comment section. And please kindly subscribe to my channel if you're just joining us today. And to my returning subscribers, I appreciate you so much for always stopping by to engage. Thanks so much. See you in my next one. Bye.